Israel is actively annexing the West Bank as violent Israeli settlers murder and displace Palestinians at a mass scale. Settlement surge is a weird way to describe the full-blown invasion of Palestine. I'm so tired of the corporate media using passive language to hide the crimes of the Israeli state. This is why a two-state solution is complete nonsense. There is no way to coexist with a genocidal state like Israel that constantly invades their neighbors. The entire West is complicit with pretending that the ceasefire ended Israeli aggression as politicians move to business as usual. The UK and Germany resumed arms shipments to the state of Israel, despite hundreds of violations of the ceasefire and them voting to annex the West Bank. We even have Zohran Mamdani and the DSA left in the United States endorsing Hakeem Jeffries and organizing with Zionists despite Israel's ongoing assault on Palestinians. The fake ceasefire put the entire progressive left to sleep. The ceasefire was fake as fuck and only designed to buy Israel time. Israel would not stop until they are forced to stop.
What's poppin'? My friends, my family, we are back here with another week of Nigga Prime Time. I have a lot to cover. You know, I'm always in the lab cooking. We got my friend DDG. What's poppin'? You guys know my friends DDG and Sarah. They always killing the game. What's poppin', Cassie? We got a lot to cover. I have my friend Jason Smith. He'll be joining us. He's our China expert. And I can't wait to get his opinion because I've seen MAGA completely humbled on the global stage, the likes I've never seen before. When they waged a trade war against China, and they lost so badly. The United States now realize what we've been saying on RBN for quite some time. I've been telling you guys that we're in this multipolar geopolitical reality now, and the United States don't really realize it. They act like they're the only dog in the house now, and Trump tried and tested this. He tried to wage his trade war against China. And then he had Brazil, like one of the biggest partners to the United States, a very important trade ally to the United States. The largest economy, have nearly half the population of South America. Brazil is a very big deal, very big deal. Brazil essentially like, hey man, we're gonna sell some soybeans to China. We fill the role that you guys are spoiling. China made a few phone calls, replaced the United States, and the United States is still in full-blown panic mode because they realize just how many cards China has. And we're going to get to that here very soon. But what I'm going to cover right now is how Europe is probably the biggest geopolitical loser right now, especially in the midst of the Ukraine war, which was a complete embarrassing loss for NATO. They try to pretend they try to negotiate for peace. No, you guys are negotiating for surrender at this point because you guys have no cards. Ukraine is facing a massive population collapse. Germany is facing mass protests because now Germany is like, man, we got cooked so bad in Ukraine. We probably got to go to war with Russia again. So now they got a military draft. So let's cover this first. I'm going to bring Jason Smith in here very soon because I want to cover Trump's foreign policy memo explaining how Europe is completely irrelevant and insignificant. This is what they have done to themselves by siding with the genocidal West, becoming subservient to the genocidal colony known as Israel. A lot of people in the EU have this rabid hatred for China, even though China has done nothing to them other than trade them goods. But because their misleaders, who was handpicked by the United States, led their country off the cliff, now Europe is more insignificant than ever. So I want to cover this first because this is Europe getting a huge wake-up call, my first main segment. Donald Trump released this memo, essentially highlighting his strategy on the geopolitical world stage. And I was shocked at how little people covered this, except the corporate media. I didn't see a lot of independent media really touch on this. Because Trump essentially was like, hey, Europe, you're insignificant. We took a giant L in Ukraine. We're going to focus more on a hemispheric global strategy because they lost to China. They can't flex their power on the global stage no more. So they're focusing more on expanding and executing on the Monroe Doctrine. This is something that Marco Rubio and many people in the Trump administration said very openly that, yeah, we can bomb ships in the Caribbean because that's our hemisphere. We control the Western Hemisphere. So as they were bombing innocent fishermen in the Caribbean, they also accused China of being too aggressive in the South China Sea. Someone please make it make sense to me. Tell you guys, the United States is the most propagandized country in the world. People actually believe, like, do you see how aggressive China's been in the South China Sea? Hey, fam, we murdered like 80 people without any trial. And you guys are talking about how aggressive China is being. Get the fuck out of here. But let's play a little bit of this segment because this shows and exposes the neoliberal worldview as well, because this neoliberal commentator is essentially having a full-blown meltdown because Trump is saying we're not going to no longer do this global policeman thing. The age of United States never-ending expansion is over. Now, what I would say, and I think a wise commentator could respond that you're full of shit. Like, I'm just telling you guys what the memo says, and he's gonna back it up here too. I'm not saying I agree with it because I think when you read this memo that Trump and his administration put out, there's a lot of politics in it. There's a lot of posturing. So you shouldn't take everything at face value, but you guys know what CNN and what their establishments do. Their job is to turn this fake WWE style politics we have and pretend it's real. Like they're like the Jim Ross. Like every single CNN commentator like Jim Ross. The wrestling commentators, your job is to make it sound real. And that's what CNN people do. So let's play a little bit of this. And I'm interested in get Jason's thoughts on this. I just had to. I want to cover this segment first before I get to China because Europe is taking massive L's, and there was massive freak out by the entire neocon class after Donald Trump released this. Let's dive into it.
With the Trump administration's drastic changes to U.S. national security strategy and its very role in the world. The document, which lays out U.S. foreign policy priorities, sounds a clear retreat, stating, quote, the days of the U.S. propping up the entire world order like Atlas are over.
Look at this neoliberal scumbag. Look at how sad he is. He said this is a retreat. He's already using language to demonstrate that he's upset about this. He's upset that, oh my God, the United States won't be the policeman of the world no more. This is crazy. This is crazy talk. This sounds amazing to me. So for one, I'm presenting what the documents say, but I don't believe it. You guys know this. I don't believe Donald Trump when he says this stuff because he's bombing and trying to control South America. But this is how they present it. So my reaction to this is, you're full of shit. That would be way too based. You would never do that. Meanwhile, look at CNN, the outlet that the dum-dums on the right wing, they believe these people lefties. They think CNN is a network full of bleeding heart liberals. Meanwhile, this guy's a fucking neocon dismaying the idea of the United States, hey, just taking a step back, not waging war against Russia. How about not going crazy over the rise of China? And look at the reaction of this liberal scumbag, which is why I tell you guys, these people are dangerous. This guy's worldview is dangerous.
Strategy and its very role in the world. The document, which lays out U.S. foreign policy priorities, sounds a clear retreat, stating, quote, the days of the U.S. propping up the entire world order like Atlas are over. The message to U.S. allies is that they, quote, must assume primary responsibility for their regions and contribute far more to our collective defense.
Where's the part where I'm supposed to be like, oh my God, this is horrible? Nations should be responsible for their own defense. The war in Ukraine must end. You guys see how he presented this as if Donald Trump made a policy demand and say we must kick puppies or something. Like, why are you reacting like this? This is very reasonable. This is neocon, neoliberal, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton worldview, which is dangerous.
One might say that means you, NATO, and Japan, and South Korea, and others. The American priorities in Ukraine now are to end the war fast and to make nice with Moscow, to, quote, reestablish strategic stability with Russia. Take note, for Israel and Saudi Arabia and others, the document says that America's reasons for focusing on the Middle East will recede.
See, my reaction to this is I don't believe this at all. I think this is more of a PR statement by the Trump administration. But how is any of this a bad thing? The United States will no longer prioritize the Middle East? Yeah, you need to get the fuck out. You guys destroyed and murdered millions of people, displaced tens of millions of people in the Middle East, helping Israel invade and bomb their neighbor, bombing kids' head off with pagers in Lebanon and bragging about it. But white liberals like this guy, who is one of the most dangerous people in the world, like the Joe Biden Democrat, they are white supremacists and Western chauvinists of the highest order because they believe that the United States must be there. We have to be in the Middle East. We have to be in Africa, or the fucking savages. These savages, their society will fall apart if it wasn't for us. We have to be there to reestablish order and reestablish democracy. That's an insanely fascistic, colonialist take. That is standard in United States corporate media. I'm not picking and choosing. They ran a version of this segment on CNN, MSNBC. You guys should see Fox. They just brag about this. They just talk about their insane ideology all the time. The idea that every country has to let the United States in. That we got to be involved in Ukraine, which is nowhere near us. That's next to Russia. We got to be involved in Europe, too. We got to be involved in South America. We got to invest in Africa. We got to kick Russia out of Africa. And at the same time, we got to be in the South China Sea. You have United States officials that have the audacity to say stuff like, China does not have a claim to the South China Sea. What the fuck are you talking about? Stay in your damn hemisphere. And if you engage in trade in other hemispheres, follow the damn rules. I still got a few more shares. I can't wait to get Jason's thought on this. I'll play a little bit more and I'll bring my guests in. We have a great writer and geopolitical analyst, Jason Smith, joining us soon. I'll play one more clip. I'll bring my guests in.
Quite a change. And in an attempt to impose a MAGA agenda on Europe, the Trump administration warns Europe it must sharply reduce immigration or face, quote, civilizational erasure due to migration from non-European countries. Joining me now is General Wesley.
Now, there's a lot of Democrat complaint about Donald Trump meddling in European politics. But once again, I got to tell you guys to grow up, you sweet summer children. What do you think the United States has been doing to countries like Europe? Like, remember the Zelensky meeting and Donald Trump embarrassed Zelensky on the global stage? And they were like, oh my God, I can't believe the United States would talk to an ally like this. Have you ever witnessed a United States conference with Africa, who they demean and insult all the time? To be an ally of the United States, you damn near an enemy, based on how they treat their close allies. What is happening to Europe right now is how the United States have treated people in the global South and in countries in the global South forever under the threat of a gun. Hey man, you better follow neoliberal austerity politics. You better deny your people health care. This is literally what they tell countries. They give them IMF loans, and they say in order one of the things you need to do in order to get these loans is you have to promise to implement austerity, to cut the minimum wage. They did that to Nigeria. They did that to Haiti. They did all these countries. And then whenever a country was like, hey man, I don't fuck with IMF no more. That's also, you see a regime change. You see a Maria Corina Machado come. All right, let's get Jason Smith in here. Our good friend, American living in China. Let me fix the screen here. American living in China, amazing geopolitical analyst, the host of the Bridge to China podcast. It's great to have you back on the show, Jason Smith. How you doing, man?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me, Nick.
Yeah, I was doing a segment. I'm going to continue the segment because we will get to China very soon because I know you dabble in geopolitics as a whole. So I want to continue this theme of Europe being humbled and the reactions of the United States shifting priorities. But I want to get your thoughts on what I covered thus far and how what I view Europe as being one of the biggest losers on the geopolitical world stage over the last few years. They expose how irrelevant they are. Their industrial industries have been completely exposed as hollow compared to China and the United States. They're facing an energy crisis. And even in the Ukraine talks, they've been shown to be completely irrelevant, as Marco Rubio didn't even bother to meet with Kaja Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen. So, Jason, I want to get your thoughts on the state of Europe, and if you want to add about their stance on their posture of China, wherever you want to add, but it's great to have you on. Any thoughts, Jason?
Absolutely. I think, well, I was listening to you before I came on, and I completely agree with you. The United States has basically vassalized Europe along with most of the rest of the developing world. You look around the world, most of the countries in the world have U.S. bases, including Europe. The fact that the U.S. national security plan calls for Europe to spend more money on its defense doesn't actually say that it's going to be devassalized or that the U.S. empire is going to leave Europe. Actually, I think what you pointed out, that we shouldn't trust this paper, that it's just a PR document. I completely agree with you. I was embarrassed for analysts coming out and taking this document seriously. This is clearly for analysts to say this is what the U.S. national security plan is, but that's actually more of a cover for what the U.S. is going to be doing covertly behind the scenes. And in terms of Europe, while they're asking European allies to spend more on their defense, the United States isn't going anywhere. You're not going to see bases in Germany closing and going back, and soldiers going back to the U.S. What the U.S. is really saying is, we want our empire to grow stronger, but we don't have the ability to do that. So you're going to do it for us. We want you to spend more money, buy more tanks, open more bases, and militarize your continent. And we're going to still stay here alongside you and tell you how to use your soldiers and armies. The United States isn't interested in drawing down its empire in Europe or in Asia near China. There's part of the document says they're going to respect China. You're not going to see any bases in that are currently containing China in the Pacific closing. You're not going to see any soldiers going home. What you're going to see is the U.S. pressuring its allies like Japan to spend more on their defense so that the U.S. can have a stronger empire in this area, and then command the soldiers in Japan, and command them in South Korea, and command them in other countries where the United States military has occupied. You're not going to see a drawdown in U.S. imperial forces in Asia or Europe. What you're going to see is the United States demanding that its vassals spend more to support the U.S. empire.
That's very well said. I'm glad that you saw through it the same way I did, because it's obvious that there's a lot of PR. And I think the meltdown by this corporate media establishment exposes them. I'll just play a little bit more of this, and I welcome your response to a lot of this, because I find their worldview fascinating in how they're able to convince Americans to buy this nonsense. So I just watch a little bit more of this, and we can move on.
Countries. Joining me now is General Wesley Clark. He is the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. And General Clark, I imagine your eyes were bulging to some degree as you read this document here. You commanded U.S. forces in Europe at a time when the American approach to the world was quite different than that which is laid out in this document here. What was your reaction to reading it? What does it mean?
Notice how, they never address how this stance of the United States being involved everywhere around the world actually benefits Americans. Are you ever going to explain how the United States controlling the Donbass is supposed to impact my life at all? In fact, I will make the argument that it negatively impacts Americans, because there's no positive to it. The only thing we're doing is racking up enemies around the world. That's you guys are making us more unsafe with your quote unquote national defense strategies. But let's continue.
First of all,
I want to show you this guy right here is insane. This old white dude on the right here, batshit crazy. Let's listen to him.
Very consistent with the actions and statements that the Trump administration has made. So I don't think there was any surprise in it. It is a transactional world. It's back to spheres of influence. It sacrifices the magic of America. For 250 years, America has lived the dream that we gave to all of mankind.
Bro, you're a grown-ass man still believing in fairy tales. You gotta realize there's a lot of people who still believe this shit. Grown-ass men, 70 years old, sound like a child. The spirit of America, the greatness we bring around the world. How has that worked for the global working class? This is why you see people around the world, they despise the United States. They're pushing toward China because you guys failed. But you guys see the twisted worldview these neocons have. They really believe the United States has been some force for good.
Influence. It sacrifices the magic of America. For 250 years, America has lived the dream that we gave to all of mankind. And we were always a radical power. That is to say, we believed that others should share the benefits of democracy and liberty. And we acted to protect that.
He just explained how we enforce our ideology on different governments. And they did it by using force under the threat of a gun. But you guys see how he described it? He's like, yeah, we've always been a radical power. Yeah, I think murdering millions of people to spread your ideology is a little bit radical. Do you have any thoughts, Jason?
I mean, your mind is the same as mine. U.S. imperial actions around the world have not brought better governments to the world. I mean, you mentioned the IMF and World Bank. You look at the last 70 years of them trying to alleviate poverty in the developing world, and nothing has changed. Nothing changed until maybe the last 15 years, where China actually came in and started building bridges and hospitals and ports and giving these countries the ability to develop themselves. Like you said, IMF imposes austerity and liberalization. These are the tools that replicate colonialism. They create the need for poor countries to export their resources to rich countries at the force of liberalization under austerity, under loans and tranche systems where they are forced to give up power and sovereignty over their own economies, denationalize, liberalize, privatize forests and give them to Western corporations for loans to build a bridge or loans to build something else. And each time these countries build these things, there are a series of tranches that go into effect that take the sovereignty, the economic and political sovereignty of their country and give it to the IMF, give it to the World Bank, give it to private corporations, which only just creates perpetual colonialism, which has been called neocolonialism, neo-imperialism, replicating the same thing that's been going on for centuries. Now the world has other alternatives. When China comes in and gives a loan, China doesn't say, we want you to nationalize something. We want you to change your economy. We want you to open your banking to us in some kind of way. China says, here's a loan, here's a bridge, pay the loan. Okay, now it's your bridge. That's it. But the IMF and World Bank have not worked that way. And that has been, like you said, under the point of a bayonet. When countries have not taken these loans in the past, regime changed. You see Argentina now. This is the ideal regime for the United States to take advantage of. They're liberalizing everything and taking huge loans, basically indebting themselves to the IMF and World Bank in perpetuity for so long as the people in Argentina will tolerate it before there is a revolution. And of course, the United States would come in. The reason we see Venezuela has nothing to do with drugs. The United States uses the most fentanyl, uses the most opioids, uses the most alcohol death abuses for any OECD country in the world. It's not about keeping drugs out. The United States has so many drug problems. That's an entire socio-economic problem that we need to solve by having rehab centers, free rehab centers across the United States to help our fellow Americans. The reason the United States is going after Venezuela is because there is a government there that was democratically elected that they're saying wasn't democratically elected. And the United States cannot tolerate a government that is not beholden to the United States. China has given a lot of loans to Venezuela and projects that have been developed there. The United States is not a welcome partner because of sanctions, because the United States is punishing the poorest people in Venezuela, because we all know that sanctions don't touch the rich. They affect the poorest people. So Venezuela is thriving despite the fact that it is enduring these horrible sanctions from the United States, which are making the poorest people there suffer. And the people are lining up to get machine guns to protect their country from the possibility of a U.S. invasion, which I actually don't think will happen. I think the United States will go on a bombing campaign and up sanctions, hoping that they can force the people to destroy their own government and install a government favorable to Washington, D.C., which the people there clearly do not want. So if your government anywhere in the world does not go along with the Washington agenda, then you're going to be targeted, by the National Endowment for Democracy. When the general there was describing the exportation of democracy, it's really the exportation of U.S. imperial power over sovereign countries around the world. So it does not look pretty for the people of Venezuela. Unfortunately, while we do have a multipolar world, I still don't think it's capable yet of standing up to U.S. imperialism.
Yeah, unfortunately not. I want to I will end the RBN stream. So if you're on RBN, make sure you switch to my personal channel or on Twitch, on X as well. This is what you mentioned earlier, and you notice how the conversation about United States sanctions is never mentioned by these people who talk about the brilliance of United States imperialism. We sanction 1/3 of the world population, fam. This is global economic war by the capitalist class in order to dictate the economies and the economic models of countries around the world. I was about to say the region, but really around the world in general. And this is about Venezuela not bowing to capitalist interests in the West. And idiots like Maria Corina Machado will say it out loud. She was like, yeah, we want to get American companies in. We want them to invest in our oil. She brags about giving away their natural resources. That's the same way they got a legion of sellout African leaders. Like you have Nigeria invading Benin and neighbors on behalf of the West because they have sellout leaders. The same when you look at Kenya, when they sell you have William Ruto go against the Supreme Court to send Kenyan police officers to Haiti against their Supreme Court on orders of the West, and now they're getting smoked. And that's why the people in Kenya fear. They get smoked for what? Fighting for Western imperial and dominance in Haiti. This is the result of the United States meddling, the United States putting sanctions on countries if they don't elect leaders they like, directly interfering with elections like we've seen Donald Trump doing on Honduras. And sanctions play a big part of this. This is the global world order that I unapologetically oppose, the one that put the world under sanctions. Meanwhile, this guy who was presented as an expert, he's a former general, NATO secretary, I think they said. What's his official title again? What did they say? Yeah, here it is. Former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. He's a general. You guys see how he has this position of esteemed. He's very accredited in our system. And you guys see how his worldview is shaped. This is why I have no respect for the quote-unquote highly educated. Like when it comes to geopolitics or social science. Now, I'm not talking about like STEM degrees, math and science, that kind of shit legit. But if you have like some sort of history degree, social science in the West, you might as well throw it away. If you got all these people with master's degrees, doctorate degrees, you're not intelligent. You just memorize United States propaganda. This man bring up magic. He said people don't understand the magic of the United States presence on the global stage. Meanwhile, CNN brings this guy on as if he's a credible political commentator. Well, I guess he is because he went pretty far in geopolitics. But look at the worldview. Completely warped. But I will move on from this because I have one more. I want to show you guys how the Europeans are responding to this directly. This is the German CNN.
Deutsche Welle.
The U.S. security strategy take aim at European allies. So they're not happy about this. I just watched a little bit of this. I want to show you guys how it's not only just the neocons in the West freaking out about this. The BBC, the DW, they haven't been taking this well at all as well. So let's
has
watch.
laid out a radical realignment of US foreign policy. It's released the long-awaited US national security strategy, revealing Trump's vision of America's future in the world. This includes a focus on migration and Latin America, and it questions America's future relationship with Europe. The document contains these lines: should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. As such, it is far from obvious whether certain European countries will have economies and militaries strong enough to remain reliable allies. For more on this, I'm joined by Bradley Bowman, Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Welcome back to DW, Bradley. There's a lot to unpack about this. Firstly, I'm interested in your reaction to this document. What do you think it signals?
You know, this is the U.S. national security strategy that is required by law for a new administration to submit 150 days after it assumes office. So it was actually due in June, so it's been quite late. At the top line level, I say that this is a consequential statement of the White House's priorities, and it's going to make our friends, including those in Europe and fence sitters around the world and our adversaries, sit up and take notice. It includes what I would call some threads of continuity that we've seen in previous national security strategies. And it also has some laudable elements, some notable omissions, and some serious, what I would call say what moments. And say what moments, and you just read one of them. Winners and losers, often, we're not talking about a game of soccer/football here, but, there are winners and losers in these documents. And I'd say in terms of winners, in terms of time, resource, and attention, the winner is Western Hemisphere and maybe the Pacific. The losers, sorry to my friends there, it's Europe. They come out in the losing. And TBD, that'd be the Middle East, Africa. This administration is basically saying good luck.
Bro, you guys realize that this guy is one of the craziest people I saw on the show, right? You realize what he's saying? He's saying you are a winner if the United States is involved in your region. He said the Pacific is one of the winners. You mean the region where fishermen are getting blown up by the United States? You mean the region where the United States is constantly involving themselves in elections and meddling in the government of other countries? And then he said one of the losers is Europe because the United States wants to withdraw more from Europe and have Europe defend more on themselves. And he said, the Africans, them niggas are screwed because if the United States is withdrawing from Africa, we don't have any presence there. This go back to the savages mentality that these people have, that Africa couldn't possibly exist or do well without United States meddling. And am I the only one who interpreting his comments right? Jason, do you have any response? You guys see how his worldview is essentially, it's a good thing when the United States is involved in the region. It's bad the less they involved. It's kind of crazy, right, Jason? Anything you want to add?
I mean, I think your analysis is correct that, people like him would like to see U.S. imperialism more active in their regions, and that seems anathema. I still would like to see if the United States is going to take any actions to back up this document beyond.
I don't think so either.
Exactly. When I'm in China and I see U.S. bases in Japan, U.S. bases in South Korea, U.S. bases in the island chain, and sales to Taiwan have just a week ago. There was a massive sales of arms to Taiwan. So it doesn't look like the U.S. is drawing down in any way at all. There's a bunch of words on a document that people are analyzing and having a conversation about, and that people are assuming means actionable items in the real world. But over here in the Pacific, we haven't seen any actual physical changes to U.S. Deployment of its troops. There's no drawdown. There's no pivot away from China. There's no removal of sales to Taiwan. There's no bases closing. There are no soldiers leaving. So this document is just a PR stunt for all intents and purposes. Nothing's actually going on. There are a lot of analysts like Brian Berlitic and Nuri Vitachi who have pointed out that the recent revolution in Nepal had U.S. fingerprints all over it. And this is right on China's border and India's. And I've spoken with Sri Lankan analysts who think the United States is preparing to encircle India as well. The United States is getting involved in Bangladeshi and in Sri Lankan politics in the hopes of actually containing India, because India is set to rise as well with massive GDP growth. So it's not even China that the United States is encircling. The United States is also beginning to encircle India as well. So it doesn't look like this national security strategy actually has any actionable items in the physical world where we exist. It's just a bunch of words and wordplay. But if you actually look at the reality on the ground, nothing is changing, and nothing looks like it's set to change either.
Yeah, why they trying to sell us on it so bad? You know, that's the role that these talking heads play. That's why it's always cringe when I see people who consider themselves anti-establishment go along with like regime talking points. Like people, I bring up Ro Khanna because he's one of the few who was brave enough to come on my show, where he was explaining how he thought the United States was involved in Ukraine out of the kindness of their heart. Like, how can you possibly believe in? Like, you don't believe in that? You have a master's degree. Like, you're trying to convince other people believe in that. So when Ro Khanna come on my show, he wants us to believe that. Because what else can I say? Like, if you really believe that, it's just jaw-dropping stupidity. And this is what the United States want us to believe. At the same time, they're blowing up fishermen in the Caribbean. This is what I mentioned earlier. This is what I shared on my timeline. The United States and Philippines announced task force to counter aggression in the South China Sea. This was a few weeks ago. As they're bombing fishermen, they accuse China of being aggressive. This is why I say, and this is why I said in the tweet as well, the United States is the most propagandized country in the world. Because you have Fox News watching boomers with New York Times subscriptions. They like, man, goddamn China being so aggressive in the seas. Meanwhile, the United States is not only fucking shut up in the Caribbean, so people don't report how the United States engaged in piracy all over the Middle East. You guys know they stole billions of dollars worth of Iranian oil, and they're like, oh, this is part of the sanctions. Where do you guys didn't wrote that? Where you read that? Where's the law that says that? You're like, well, no, we just have sanctions. That means we can steal their oil whenever. They did the same thing with Syria before the head choppers took charge, where they were stealing Syrian wheat. They were stealing the oil. And they're like, oh my God, look at the mismanagement by the Syrian government. Look at Assad mismanaging his resources as they're stealing their fucking water and wheat. And you have Americans, they come back home, you have all the free Syrian stupid people, they're like, yeah, the fucking Assad, why is he mismanaging his economy when the United States is sanctioning them to death? They're stealing the resources. You guys see how, this is why I will continue to say the United States is the most propagandized country in the world. The last thing I want to share on the Europe story is Kaja Kallas. You guys know I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of Kaja Kallas. She's insane. She responds to Europe becoming more irrelevant, because that's the one thing I do take from this. This is Europe is more irrelevant as a political power. Joe Biden was nice to them. Like, he tried to say nice things to them, but he knew Donald Trump is more open about it. Hey man, we need to get India on our side. We need to get Lula and Brazil on board. We don't give a fuck about you guys. So here's Kaja Kallas. This is the last thing I'll share about the Europe story. This is essentially her quick response to it.
The European Union's foreign policy chief Kaja Kallas has downplayed a new US strategy paper critical of Europe. Published on Friday, the document called Europe overregulated and facing civilizational erasure because of mass immigration. Speaking at the Doha Forum in Qatar, Kallas said the US remained Europe's biggest ally despite policy differences. Comments are in contrast to Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, who rejected what he called outside advice. Here's more of what Kaja Kallas had to say.
You know, U.S. is still our biggest ally, and there I read it as well, that we are still the biggest ally, and it's in the interest of United States as well that Europe lasts, and that we are really still the ally and working together for these things. I think we haven't always seen eye to eye on different topics, but I think the overall principle is still there. We are the biggest allies and we should stick together.
So my initial reaction to this, and I still kind of hold this, that I think this is embarrassing. It showed a lack of sovereignty. Like, how are Europeans not embarrassed by this? The United States essentially ditched you guys, and your response is, "Oh, they're still my best friend. They're still our best friend. We need the United States." You guys see the lack of sovereignty that these leaders have. There's not an independent thought going through her brain. Like, Kaja Kallas cracks me up as she speaks about these kind of things. But there's also another interpretation. This is what you mentioned earlier, Jason. Maybe she knows this is full shit too. Like, maybe this is Kaja Kallas awakening ultra instinct. Or maybe she see through. So I know they talking shit, but Donald Trump, he's not gonna abandon the Ukraine war. Maybe she knows that this document is full shit. So I guess that's another way to push it. Any final thoughts on this document and their reaction, Jason, before I move on? I'm gonna cover a little bit of Ukraine and we get to China. Anything else you want to add before I move on, Jason?
Well, you just mentioned regulation, or the document, she mentions regulation. Again, that goes back to this concept of neoliberalism. The same thing that we see in IMF and World Bank has done to the developing world. If the United States is complaining that Europe is overregulated, they should be really worried, because that's exactly the language that the United States IMF or World Bank uses when they go into developing countries. They say, "Oh, you're overregulated. We need to liberalize your economy." So it looks like if that's really the language that the United States would like to do to Europe, what it's been doing to the developing world for the last, century. So I'd be really, really worried if I were European, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing that was freaking out about, and I just want to cover this quickly because it shows how suicidal, how brain dead the European leaders are, just how just drunk with military industrial complex profits from arm dealers, their obsession with war. That they're one of the reasons why they upset this document is that they wanted to normalize relations with Russia. It's like the as you mentioned, I agree. This is the PR message that, hey, we want peace in Ukraine, but I think Donald Trump has done an awful job at actually trying to make this a reality. I don't know if you know this as well, but whenever he talk about peace in Ukraine, he would then throw in some shit that he knows is a Russian red line, and then they come around later. See, I try to make peace, but the fucking Russian, I just want a little bit of security guarantees. That's all we wanted. Russians like the security guarantees. Is why we went to war in the first place. We don't want you in Ukraine. So the point is, I never gave Trump any credit for that, and it's part of the PR that they still pretend that they want peace in Ukraine. And just them even bringing it up, the fact that they want peace in Ukraine, it freaks out every single neocon in the West. You guys saw the CNN guy who had on his bullet point. He's like, Donald Trump wants peace in Ukraine. This is awful. What is the end goal for you people? Because the Western media on TV, they never say this. But it's interesting, if you go to print media like the New York Times and Washington Post, they even bring it up all the time. Like, you guys know, this is one of the rare things that the New York Times and Washington Post, they will cover. They're like, hey guys, despite what CNN and MSNBC is saying, we're actually getting our ass whooped. You guys know how many headlines for the New York Times that's saying this? Like, it's almost like even the psychopaths in the New York Times are trying to looking at the European neocons like, hey, this is going badly for us, right? There are a lot of theories I have about why they tell the truth about this every once in a while. Here's another example of this. Battlefield picture worsening for Ukraine as Trump pushes peace plan. And they explain essentially how the Ukrainian front lines has completely collapsed. Russian forces have advanced on several fronts recently. This is why it's kind of interesting when you look at the written corporate media. They will tell the truth, but then the ruling class will take no lessons learned from here. So if Ukraine is getting wiped out on the battlefield, what exactly is your end goal? Because Ukraine is facing complete population collapse. Where is the criticism from the NATO left over this? As Ukraine is facing a population collapse, the BlackRock Prime Minister from Germany, he's bragging like, oh yeah, we got to keep this going forever. Ursula von der Leyen want to keep this going forever. She loved the idea that Ukrainian men are dying for them. Friedrich Merz of Germany loved the idea that Ukrainian men are dying to slightly weaken Russia. Like, the prisoner exchange is crazy. The difference between dead Ukrainian troops, dead Russian troops. They're like, man, Russia is taking a big cost to this war. Like, fam, they did a death exchange rate recently where there was like 50 dead Ukrainian troops for every 1 dead Russian. Like, Ukrainians are getting wiped out. And I want to get your thoughts, Jason, on the state of Ukraine crisis as you see it. But this is another example how Europe completely sacrificed and destroyed Ukraine. For what? So the military-industrial complex can test new weapons? That's another benefit of this war that they've been open about, that they get a chance to test new battlefield innovation and techniques. They turned the entire country of Ukraine to war guinea pigs. Now the country has no hope. The NATO left watched, the Bernie Sanders left, the AOC left, watched as the military-industrial complex completely destroyed the state of Ukraine because they didn't want to negotiate over the Donbass and Luhansk region, who wants to be Russia in the first place, because they wanted to side with a Nazi regime. So I'll read this headline, and Jason, I'll get your thoughts. The youth exodus. Ukraine's young people are increasingly quitting their jobs to go abroad. So, fam, the Ukrainian state, as we know it, is done. Destroyed by NATO in the horrible geopolitical strategy. But, Jason, that was my pretty long-winded explanation of the Ukraine crisis now. But you have anything else you want to add? What's your thoughts about the European strategy on Ukraine, and where does this end?
You know, you mentioned endgame, and I think that's really interesting because if we look from World War II forward, the United States has hardly ever won a war. And I think, you know, we have to think, what was the United States goal in losing so many wars? I don't actually think the United States goal was necessarily always to win. It's actually more nefarious than that. So if we look at Ukraine, I encourage anyone who's listening to this program, go back to the year 2000 or 2005 and read Western headlines about Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian government. Everything was almost universally negative. The United States hated Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, and the U.S. media reflected that. And then you look forward, and then suddenly the United States is like, hey, we're going to back you. You're our friend. You're going to go to war with Russia for us. And so now the United States, like you said, there are benefits, right? Well, what are those benefits? Obviously, one of those is selling weapons to Ukraine from U.S. Funds. The U.S. gives money to Ukraine. Ukraine buys weapons from the United States. Who benefits? The U.S. military-industrial complex, Boeing, Raytheon. So that's one benefit. Also, we're looking at this document, the U.S. security strategy. You can see Europeans are being asked to spend more on weapons to develop their own, but also to buy them from the United States. While at the same time, U.S. bases, there's no drawdown that we know of. There's no bases closing that we know of. At the same time, the Ukrainians are absolutely being decimated. Is the U.S. losing, or is the U.S. strategy not to win? Is the U.S. strategy to eradicate the Ukrainian people and keep Russia bogged down spending money on a war? So maybe the United States is actually getting exactly what it wanted. It's getting money for the military-industrial complex while wiping out its ally, Ukraine, which it actually didn't like for decades prior to suddenly saying, let's back you in this war. So my own opinion is, I don't think the United States ever had the best interest of Ukraine in mind. That is something that is said publicly so that the United States could decimate the Ukrainian people, because the United States has long disliked those people.
Yeah, that's why it's great to have you on, Jason, because not only just China, Jason's quality when it comes to geopolitical analysts in general. So make sure you guys check out his podcast. I definitely want to get to China now. I want to ask you your thoughts about this complete collapse of a trade war by them. But this here shows the end game for Europe and why my pressure is on them. Another reason is because Europe is completely descended into full-blown fascism. My friend Rame Erdogan has been arrested for standing up against the genocidal state of Israel, lost her medical license. I did a hotspot video covering that. You guys know in the UK, 33 people per day is being arrested because of social media posts. Meanwhile, Zoran Mamdani, he will never say anything about them. He will condemn Venezuela. He'll condemn Cuba. Bernie Sanders will condemn Maduro. AOC will condemn Maduro, but they never condemn Europe. Europe, full-blown fascism. Germany, they're arresting old grandmas in Germany for standing for Palestine action. And now Germany, after implementing massive austerity to their shrinking youth population, who now have the social burden to pay for a aging senior population social benefit, they're now forcing them to go to voluntary military service. Now there are massive protests in Germany. Wonder why they're planning a military draft in Germany and forcing militarism in the country. As I just explained, the Ukraine population is completely collapsing. The youth in the country is fleeing. The ones who are there have been completely wiped out. So I don't know if the European population see it in action, but their ruling class is preparing them for World War III. That's why they allow their energy prices to skyrocket. That's why they're pushing austerity on their population. That's why Labour is teaming up with the Conservatives in UK to privatize their economy. That's why the NHS has been stripped down. They're making life harder for the working class. They do the same thing in the United States. So you'd be more willing to serve the empire for a biscuit. That's the goal. And I'm terrified to see this plan that they have, where after they lose to Russia and Ukraine, there's going to be the war between NATO and Russia, which people like Kaja Kallas have been very open about. Anyway, let's get to China. I'll end my European segment on that thought. I mentioned earlier this in passing, but I want to dive more into how I said Donald Trump and MAGA was humbled in the trade war. So this will be our segment about how China blew the United States back. Donald Trump was humbled. He had this ideology that I think he legitimately had. People said he'd been ranting about this for decades. Like, even in the 90s, he's like, man, why don't we just throw around the United States economic power and tariffs, which honestly was a more plausible game plan back then. But the things have changed since then. And Donald Trump has been critical of politicians of both parties for being, quote unquote, weak on China. So he had this plan. In his first term, he dabbled into it, but didn't go all out. Now, the second term, in the beginning, he went all out in trying to impose economic dominance on China, because now they've seen how much they rose in just a few years, and it freaked the United States out. So I said it like in the beginning of this year. I think it was Donald Trump flipping the chessboard. I think when we were talking about it before, I said like Donald Trump flipping the chessboard. But China, it wasn't even like mutually assured destruction, because China had a lot of cards to play, had a lot of aces in the sleeve in preparation of this trade war. And look, this is from the Washington Post. I love showing you guys headline from the establishment admitting their L. I don't have to show radical. I don't have to use radical sources, which is why it's weird that I'm considered unreliable. I'm using your motherfucking sources, fam. But here it is. Despite Trump's tariffs, China global trade surplus tops $1 trillion. Which I want to get your analysis on that. I want your thoughts on the trade war. Maybe I don't know if I'm being too hyperbolic or not. But to me, and the reason why I'm describing it like this, because to me, this seemed like a massive L on behalf of the United States and their show of power. But Jason, what do you think?
Well, I think another statistic that backs up what you're saying in terms of China's victory in this trade war is that basically the United States' goal was to reduce Chinese exports by cutting China off from as many U.S. consumers as possible. But what's happened is China completely replaced U.S. consumers with consumers in the developing world. So solar panels that were not going to the United States, EVs that were not going to the United States, are now flooding into other countries. 73% of all cars bought in Nepal now are Chinese EVs. And solar is now going throughout the entire developing world. You look at a lot of African countries, their solar importations and deployments are skyrocketing. This is so good in so many ways. And I'm not just talking about the environment. Let's set the environment aside for a moment. Let's just talk about realpolitik. If a developing country has renewable resources, renewable energy resources that it's buying from China, that country wins in another way. It doesn't have to buy coal or oil or LNG. Where does most oil and LNG come from? The US and its partners. So now those countries are now more independent, economically sovereign than they were before. They are no longer dependent on the LNG and oil that the United States controls around the world to greater or lesser degree, depending on where they're buying it from. This gives a lot of more power to those developing countries. So we're not just talking about China. When China is winning the trade war, really what that means is the global South together is collectively winning to some extent. A lot of the products that were going to US consumers are now going to the developing world, albeit there are more products actually being moved at lower profit margins. China is still benefiting greatly. More profits were made in exportations from China this year than in any previous year. And China's GDP is set to grow, according to Goldman Sachs, at 5%, which is the goal that China set for itself at the beginning of the year. I think it'll be closer to 5.1 or 5.2 looking at the data if you look at each quarter. So the United States' attempt to contain China's economic growth did not work. And China's GDP will continue to grow at more than twice the speed of that of the US. And the real difference here is the United States is growing in its financialized economy, a lot of made up numbers, really. And in China, actual real infrastructure is constantly being built in forms of manufacturing, robotics, new bridges, infrastructure, roads, and the roads and bridges and ports in other countries as well that are partners with China. And I think this actually is really good for the world, not just, for China. If you look at the developing world, it's not just that they're getting products from China or that they're getting economic independence from supply chains controlled by imperial powers, but those countries are getting the kinds of infrastructure that they need to actually begin to develop. No one wants to be dependent on food aid from the United States. They want to grow their own food. People want their own respect. They want their own ability to take care of themselves. And I think that's what China is giving them. Because if you have education, if you have hospitals, if you have ports, if you have roads, if you have this kind of thing, you can develop yourself and create your own sustained prosperity. And I think that's really where China plays a pivotal role. China knows that it's not going to be able to rewrite the global world order on its own by just becoming richer on its own. So China is trying to bring a lot of the rest of the global South with it. So this trade war that the United States initiated on China and many of its allies as well is actually a trade war against the developing world and its prospects for sustained development. But it didn't work. And China and its partners in the Belt and Road Initiative and other the Global Governance Initiative and the Global Civilization Initiative and in BRICS are continuing to grow very strongly. Another thing I'd just like to point out, every country in Africa except one now has 0 tariffs if it wants to export goods to China. So those countries can make money back. When I see a trade surplus in China of $1 trillion, I am a little concerned to some extent. So I hope a lot of that investment goes back to the developing world, because you also have to remember when China takes in this money, a lot of it's not in yuan. It's in multiple currencies, including dollars. And China has to reinvest this forex, this foreign held currency reserves in other countries. So we have banks like AIIB and so forth that can actually redirect the money that China is getting into infrastructure in other countries. Because the money, you can't just take, rubles and say, okay, we're going to spend this on the streets of Beijing. You can't do that. Those rubles have to go somewhere. So when you look at Belt and Road Initiative projects, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank projects around the world, a lot of that money is going into third-party countries. It's going to Africa. It's going to South America. It's going to Southeast Asia to build bridges, to build hospitals, to build schools, to build roads. So yeah, it's a win in a way, because China's not actually taking that $1 trillion into itself as pure profit. It actually has to do something with that. And increasingly, it's not buying U.S. treasuries. And what that means is this $1 trillion in trade surplus is actually going to be diffused into the developing world. So it's not a win for China. It's a win for multipolarity.
That was such a fantastic breakdown, Jason. One more thing I want to ask you, because we're going to begin to wrap up here soon. I have to ask you about Sane Takaichi, the Japanese prime minister, who I absolutely adore, because she has been exposing the psychotic sellout neocon class in Japan and how subservient they are to the United States and the malicious role that Japan is playing on the world stage like no one else. And this is a headline I saw earlier today because I've been covering Sane Takaichi because she has drawn a ton of ire in China because she was inspired by Margaret Thatcher. I explained this when she was elected that she was Margaret Thatcher inspired. She was even she's on the right of the neocon party, like the Shinzo Abe alliance that was really close to Nero Tanden and the neoliberal Democrats. Sanae Takaichi is to their right. She was considered a far right rising star because her entire campaign was about how we need to slash Japanese social spending in order to double Japanese military spending in order to prepare for conflict with China. So then the Japanese ruling class who selects the prime minister, not the people, they like, we want her in charge to show just the mindset of Japan. So she's a crazy Margaret Thatcher inspired leader. So when she was elected, she immediately started doing Margaret Thatcher shit, where she said that Japan may become militarily involved in Taiwan if they reunify with China. And China did not take that lightly. And they've been dragging her publicly. And now it was such a bad PR for her initial start as prime minister and for Japan. Japan had to send ambassadors to China to publicly apologize. They was humiliated on the world stage because China was holding them to account. Now they're just headline. And Jason, I want you to react to this and any initial thoughts you have about Sanae Takaichi. Look, Tokyo is disappointed by sparse U.S. public support as China-Japan tensions escalate. So, fam, do you know how crazy Sanae Takaichi is? Where you have Donald Trump, like, hey, Sanae Takaichi, fucking chill the hell out. You crazy. Look, Trump, after call with China's Xi, told Tokyo to lower the volume on Taiwan. Here's another headline. So essentially, Donald Trump of all people, was like, man, you need to tone it down with the rhetoric, you crazy asshole. Look, Trump urged Japan's Takaichi not to aggravate China. So Trump is like, bro, chill the hell out. What the hell is wrong with you? You guys know how crazy it is? Do you have Donald Trump telling you that your rhetoric is going too far? Jason, any reactions to Sanae Takaichi and the Chinese response to her as a leader? Her prime ministership has been funny from the very beginning. But any thoughts, Jason?
A lot. Well, I'd like to make 3 points. The first point I would like to talk about Japan's economy and what this has done to Japan. So Japan has the largest debt to GDP ratio of any country in the world. It's 231% of GDP is debt. And that is really a crisis in the waiting. I mean, Japan's economy is set to reset in some kind of really dramatic and tragic way really soon. Their economy, their GDP is contracting as their debt is increasing. So they're actually in a recession already. And this whole year, they're probably going to go into -0 GDP growth. At the same time, they're one of the largest sources of revenue for Japan is tourism from China. And immediately after she made those remarks, we saw 500,000 flights canceled. So, I mean, they need the revenue from Chinese tourism in order to survive. We saw a lot of comments in social media where people are like, oh, yay, I don't want Chinese tourists in Japan. There was a lot of racist rhetoric between both countries. And I would like to see that point too diffused. I would like to see Chinese people calm down about Japan and Japanese people calm down about China, because I would like to see them at peace. You know, one of the reasons Asia is so prosperous is because there hasn't been a major war in Asia in decades. And so I would not like to see a conflict erupt. Japan's economy is going to take care of itself, and they're not going to be a real threat. There's already rumors that she's going to be withdrawn as prime minister of Japan because, you know, a lot of, you know, major wealthy people in Japan who obviously have a lot to say in politics don't like the fact that the economy is collapsing, that she has accelerated that process. My third point is about China and Taiwan. The best strategy for China, and China knows this, is to do nothing. Because so long as China's GDP is growing at 5% a year, and the US economy is growing at 2% a year, and Japan's economy is in recession, contracting actually. China doesn't actually have to do anything, because every year that China does nothing, it becomes more powerful in the game. So China's best play is to just say, hey, you know what? Those were irresponsible remarks, and you should apologize. And you should apologize for the war crimes still from World War II, which Japan has not really apologized for. And then just do nothing. And I think China knows this. China, the leaders here in Beijing, they're incredibly wise. They're incredibly patient. They have thousands of years of political history, and they're going to just wait it out until China is in a far better position to dictate terms about how, another thing, if you look at Taiwan, a lot of young people now want to be rejoined with the mainland in some way. So China doesn't actually want to invade Taiwan province. China knows that it becomes richer and the West becomes less wealthy by comparison. And Taiwan's economy is completely tied to China's mainland in a lot of different ways. All China really needs to do is wait and dangle a carrot, and eventually there will be some kind of reunification. Maybe Taiwan doesn't become just a province. Maybe there's some kind of larger system that encapsulates some sort of larger economic Chinese system that develops, or political system, an umbrella between the two. But however it develops, all China really needs to do, and this is what they're doing in Beijing, is just wait.
Yeah, I hope you're right, because the Taiwanese prime minister scares the shit out of me. the APAC lover, the guy who was partying with APAC, the guy who praised Israel. I'm like, man, because you guys think like polls show the Taiwanese people want peace with China. I'm not saying they're Chinese fanboys. I'm not saying they're fans of the state, but they want peace and they want the status quo. And the ruling party that has been pushing for separatist ideology has been losing political power, even though they still had enough to maintain the prime minister. That's why I'm like worried as fuck, because you have this portion of Taiwanese society that seems suicidal. But I think a lot of Taiwanese, especially the youth, they look at Ukraine. They've seen how Ukraine was destroyed and used by the West, and they will be completely absurd if they chose that fate. I think, like you said, I do agree. I think they're wisening up. I think the Taiwanese separatist ideology is dying a very slow death. It is the prime minister or president. I'm blank. I think he's the president or prime minister, but his rhetoric is crazy. He scared the shit out of me. But anyway, Jason, it's great to have you on, especially for any updates on China. But you're pretty solid on geopolitics in general, so it'll be great to have you on to talk more in the future. But anything else you want to plug and promote? Any final thoughts? Make sure you guys check out his podcast, the Bridge to China podcast, and follow Jason Smith on X. A lot of great geopolitical analysts on his page. So thank you for joining us once again, Jason Smith.
Thank you so much for your time, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be back on Wednesday. I forgot who do I have scheduled on Friday, Toya? I'm blanking. You guys know I'm always in the lab cooking. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have Camilla on next week. We're gonna talk about Donald Trump's insane policy in Venezuela. I have a hotspot video I'll make tomorrow. A lot going on. Make sure you guys support us on Patreon. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Have a great night, my friend.